Alright, so these have now had 24 hours to cure. Now, basically what I'm doing is I'm just following the instructions on the box. Now, there's also things about what sort of temperature you're in and all that sort of stuff. Right, and so as you can see, these pieces, right, are all, some of them a little bit stuck together, or stuck to the base. They come off pretty easily. I found if there's any stuck together, you can just split them apart. That's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change cameras. I'm going to go one of the closer angles. I'm going to cut one of these down. I've got myself a knife. Yeah, of course, we're always careful when we're using knives, but long, thick blade. I think these ones, the slightly thicker blade, are a bit better for giving you straight cuts. You might go for a thinner blade if you want to make more fine-tuned curves and things. Okay, let's change cameras. All right, so I'm going to clean these ones out of the way. We'll have a go at this one here. Now, as you can see, these are the edges that are going to marry up to my other piece. And you see I've put magnets in these ones. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to come along. I'm holding my knife kind of at a rough angle, right? And I'm just basically going to take a chunk out of the top of this. Always cutting away from myself so I don't accidentally slice myself. Right, so you can see I've kind of trimmed all the sides and I've made myself a nice little volcano here. And then I'm just going to come along, just going to take the cap off that. Right, and so you can see here. Right, and so you can see around the bottom here, I look at it there, you see I've got a little bit of foam hanging over. So what I'm going to do is just take the knife. I'm trying to make nice shallow cuts in here so I get a nice slope that runs down to the edge. Now when this whole thing is finished, I'm basically going to fill in around this area here. Right, you can see there's a bit of gap there. But the fill I'm going to use is going to cover all of that sort of stuff. And so I'm going to get a nice tapered heel piece coming up to level of the surface of this edge. Now, it doesn't hurt to have a look on the side here. I've got a little bit of a raised up surface here. I'm not too worried about that. As long as this area, these two timber areas are nice and clear, then everything's going to be okay. Okay, let's do a three-sided one. Now, one of the nice things about this expanding foam versus normal polystyrene is it doesn't have that stickiness to it. Okay, so same principle again. I'm going to come along and just basically cut great big blocks off this one. Now, I have got a new blade in this knife. Right, so the new blade does actually make it a little bit easier to cut pieces off. Be careful, don't get too ambitious and cut all the way through. Okay, back to doing the front edge again. So I'm going to get this so it's nice and tapered down. Now, you can see I've got a bit of a raised up edge there, so I'm just going to come and take that off. You can see, if you look on the shape, on the side profile of this, you can see I've got it's shallow here, and then it leaps up a bit. Looking at the edge of this here, these little returns are probably where you might get a bit of a stone course. So I'm actually going to come in, I'm going to dig a little bit of that out. Right, so I can do a lot of sculpting in terms of changing how I might want this to look. You might notice that I've got some quite big holes in here. Right, now that's just the way that the foam goes, and so what I'm going to do later on is I'm going to fill some of those. All right, let's do one more. Let's have a look at this piece here. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well actually I like the front of this. It looks a little bit rocky. Right, so it's a bit of a cliff face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a cliff face. So for this one, I'm going to be a bit more careful about taking some of that front off. So I'm going to come and take some of this edge out. And what I'm actually going to do is going to put a vertical slice in there. And then just take out some wedges of this. The key thing with this cliff is it's got to still marry up with the other pieces of the set. Now, if you wanted to have, say, a great big line of cliffs, then you could make a whole series of these pieces which line up with each other at the cliff face. Right, but here, what I actually want to do is I want to have it so there's this cliff on this part here, and then it tapering off to a return so it matches in with the rest of the piece, or the rest of the set. And we're going to put cover over this later, so having a few penetrating cuts into it isn't going to be the end of the world. Now, it's a pretty big jump of a hill from the flat straight up, so I'm going to take a bit off the back as well. I feel like giving it a bit of a haircut. And then we're going to do the same over this side over here. Now hopefully you'll see this is a pretty quick process, and it will be much quicker if I didn't have to worry about where the camera is. Okay, so I'm looking across the top of this and going, okay, that's probably a little bit higher than I really want it to be. In hindsight, if I was picking a piece to turn into a cliff, probably maybe wouldn't go something which has got quite as much bulk in it, and maybe start with something which is a bit like this, which is a bit more reasonable. However, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shape this down. I'm also thinking of the sort of scale of figures I might use with this kit. So if I'm going to be playing 28mm, I want to leave myself a few spots here where I might be able to, say, get a base in. And across the front here. Now, if you've watched any sorts of videos about using foam, so putting some little vertical cuts in, that gives me something, it will give me a bit of interest for the actual model shape later on. Now, I wouldn't say for a moment that I'm an expert in foam sculpting, so there's plenty of other videos around to watch about that. So I'd be suggesting going watching those. Now, one of the things I am looking out for here is I have a few spots where I've got some big holes, and I'm just cutting into those because I can use them rather than having to fill them. I can just use them as part of, as a, if you like, as a feature. Right, so the front face of that I'm just going to leave as it is. Going to put a few cuts in here that represent, you know, where potentially boulder lines are. If you're watching this and you go like, oh, I've got a guy who makes amazing videos of how to do rocks and cliffs and stuff, feel free to link it in the comments below, and then everybody else can have the benefit of that. Just a little bit of a clean up around the front here. One final thing you'll see here, I've got a little bit of foam sticking up on the top surface there. I'm just going to make sure I trim that all the way down, because that will, it'll just be annoying later on when we come to do the top coat over the whole thing. Just looking for any bits that are sticking out that maybe don't look so great. Right, okay, so we have a corner, we have a massive cliff feature, right, and then a three-piece. Remember, 3 going 1, 2, 3 faces. Okay, there we go. I'm going to get stuck into the rest of this. I'll leave it on overhead video so you can fast forward, watch through this whole process.